Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Greg and I are back with another wonderful English conversation for you all to enjoy. And the reason we do these is to give you an opportunity for some nice native English speaker listening practice. As you notice, native English speakers are going to be doing things like connected speech. We're going to be doing different things with our intonation and our inflection patterns that you need to be aware of when you're in English speaking contexts. And so this is one of the reasons we do these, to give you that opportunity to improve your listening skills, your comprehension skills, your pronunciation, learning new vocab and new expressions as well. And today we're going to dive into a question that we get asked quite a bit here at Advanced English. So the question is, what are some of the differences between U.S. English, American English, and British English? And there are a couple of varieties within British English, but we're going to speak about them globally, I think. As Americans, we're not British, obviously, so we are going to give you our perspective. We've been there. We've been to the UK, and so...
I actually lived in Hong Kong while it was a British colony, so I have a little bit of direct life experience in a British colony.
So that's perfect. So we're going to jump right into this conversation. So grab a warm beverage and let's get into it. All right. So let's break it into a few different categories. The first being the accent, which I think is the most stark contrast at the get-go.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the most obvious ones. So first of all, when we're talking about the British accent, let's keep in mind that there are a wide range of accents depending on where you are in the UK, right? So different regions are going to have different ways of saying things, and that includes the accent. There's quite a bit of diversity, in fact.
Definitely.
And once you hear the differences, it's quite obvious. The one that is most commonly taught is, do you remember the name?
I believe it's received pronunciation, RP. Some people, I think, refer to it as Queen's English. So if you've watched the popular Netflix series, The Crown, you'll notice there's a specific type of English. I think that's even more specific to the royal family. But if you think about people who are maybe in the media, so maybe a broadcast journalist, they might speak with received pronunciation. Of course, as Greg said, there's so many varietals. And so if you're in a part of the UK that doesn't use received pronunciation broadly, then it might be that dialect. So that's something to keep in mind. And much like the UK, in the United States, we have that variety as well. If you go to the South, you're going to hear certain pronunciation. If you go to the West, you're going to hear a certain pronunciation. If you're in the Northeast, you'll hear a certain pronunciation. So what's our accent?
Our accent, I always say I have no accent, which of course is not the correct thing to say, but it doesn't feel like I have an accent.
Right. So our accent is actually Northeastern.
Northeastern, that makes sense.
Yeah. So, that's just specific to people who are from the Northeast in the United States. But back to the UK, so that's the received pronunciation that we're dealing with generally.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And it is remarkable how different the different accents could sound. It almost sounds like it's from a different country.
Absolutely.
Another very common one is called Cockney.
Yes.
Cockney English.
Yeah.
And if you hear the two, but in any event, I find the received English to be one of the most beautiful forms of English.
Yes, it's very easy on the ears. It's very delicate, refined. It immediately sounds classy. It sounds, assertive, but also very elegant.
Yeah. It's nice. It's definitely nice in the ears. And it has this funny effect, at least on Americans, of making the person sound very smart and educated. So
It does.
if someone's speaking in received English, you tend to want to agree with them, whatever it is they're saying.
That's true. So I thought one interesting comparison between, you see a transformation happening in one of the most popular plays and films called My Fair Lady. And Audrey Hepburn, if you know, you know. So Audrey Hepburn is one of my favorite actresses. I think many of you out there as well, because she's an international icon. And what's really interesting is that if you watch that film, you'll see someone using the Cockney accent all the way after a transformation into the received pronunciation. And she works with a linguist and a person who teaches her phonology and phonetics. And they go through a series of different practice drills, and it's this whole progression. I really recommend that film, especially on this topic here, so you get some exposure to those different types of accents.
Of British accents. Yeah, it's a true classic. It's a really good one.
Yeah. All right, so that's really in terms of accent, but if you go to the UK, I think you'll start, as you're immersed in the culture there, there's so many subcultures, as we know, and they're all geographically, it's geographically based as well, right? So you'll start to get more accustomed to understanding those different dialects. The other thing you can do, if you're curious, is check out some films. I believe Billy Elliot, do you remember that film?
Oh, yeah.
That was a very strong accent as well, right? So I remember having some difficulty. Even though I'm a native English speaker, I had to put subtitles. Even though they were speaking in English, it was a type of English that I wasn't very familiar with at the time. And this was, several years ago, but it was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, right? Even native English speakers like us, we sometimes need the subtitles if the accent's heavy enough.
Yeah, and that's perfectly fine. So don't think that, as native English speakers, all native English speakers understand other native English speakers of English with different accents, like Australian, New Zealand, global English, which
South
is
African.
Different, right? South African, UK, and all the varieties within that.
I'm holding back really hard from trying to demonstrate these. I'm terrible with accents, but I love speaking in them.
So that's the thing, right? That you bring up an interesting point there, Greg, because if it's an education, if there's a reason to do it and it's supposed to be educational, then that's one thing. But a lot of people take offense. In the U.S., let's say, I don't know how it is in the U.K., but in the U.S., if you try to replicate an accent, they might think that you're making fun. So it's a very delicate balance of how do you model a certain pronunciation or accent without offending.
That's a good point. Yeah, often I think when people, the reason that happens is I think when people try and imitate another accent, they tend to exaggerate it.
Yeah.
And they might also adapt some of the stereotypical mannerisms.
Right, or nonverbals.
Or vocabulary, which I'm sure we'll get to as well.
Yeah.
And as a result, it ends up being potentially offensive. A lot of times it isn't, and it's just for fun.
Yeah.
And it's certainly not intended to be.
Yeah.
But it is, you're right, something to be mindful of when sampling other accents.
Absolutely. So what I always like to say is read the room. So if you're if you're with your spouse or your partner or your best friend and you're just trying out, because it's fun to try out different ways of speaking in, the privacy and comfort of your own home, that's one thing. If you're doing it with the intention of maybe making fun, that's a completely different thing. That's a big no-no in my book. What about you?
Yeah,
of course.
Yes.
Yeah, right. Just want to make sure you're following
your
along.
objective should never be offensive, but it's more so about just being aware that what you think might not be offensive could be offensive to other people.
And if that were the case, then you apologize profusely. You say that was not my intention. Because, when you're trying out different accents, let's say you are let's say you're a non-native English speaker, an ESL learner, and you want to know which accent to use. Maybe you want to try out what feels good on you, right? You want to know the sensations of using an American accent or received pronunciation or a Manchester accent or a Cockney accent, right? It really comes down to preference. And the only way to know that is to try. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll say is a great way to practice it is with that a person who has that accent. So if you come to that person, with an accent that you want to try and replicate, and say, "Hey, I'm really interested in trying to speak the way you do. Could you help me walk through a few words to sort of parse out the differences.
Yes.
That's a great way to approach it, right? In a sort of open-minded and educational context. And I personally, I love hearing, British speakers trying to emulate the American accent, because it's fun for me to hear the things that I don't even notice. When someone's trying to replicate my accent, they'll say things in ways that I didn't realize I was actually saying them as well. So I enjoyed and I love helping other people speak the way I do if that's of interest to them. And so that's something you can consider if you wanted to try out one of these accents.
What I really like to do, if we are watching a film or a series and the lead or the protagonist, the main character, is actually someone from the UK, like a British actor or actress, but they replicate an American accent. And sometimes if you're not paying attention, you won't notice because they'll do it so beautifully, so well. But then every once in a while, you'll notice maybe something a little bit different. And I always love trying to figure out, who's from the US and who's from the UK when they're doing it, because sometimes you really can't tell, but other times you can. And a giveaway, in my opinion, is that when there's a British actor and they're trying to replicate the American accent, sometimes it comes out too beautiful, too clear, like they're doing too well of a job. It's too perfect. Whereas, when we're speaking in American English, we have a lot of connected speech happening. Like it's not as articulate always. So that's something to keep in mind. All right, moving on to vocabulary and some words and some expression differences. So two come to mind. One is candy and sweets.
Great. I was going to say, before we go into specifics, let's talk a little bigger picture.
Bigger picture, good idea.
So what I found is that British English tends to be a little more indirect, right? So the words that they use tend to be a little less literal, perhaps a little less, for lack of a better word, aggressive.
Okay.
Right? There's just a more subtle touch to the English vocabulary than there is in American vocabulary. So bigger picture, that's sort of what I observed living in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you had any observations in that regard.
I think I would agree with you. I mean, I've traveled to the UK several times, and I think there's like the delicate sort of finesse to it.
Yeah. In terms of specific vocab, so you were saying candy and sweets?
Yeah, that's something that comes to mind.
Yeah, sweets. When you said sweets, that immediately brought me back to my childhood Halloween in Hong Kong.
Okay.
Because, all my British friends, said, let's go get some sweets.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's one difference. The other one is like pram and stroller. A pram is a stroller. Mm-hmm. So, in the US, we say stroller. In the UK, they say pram.
Yep. I get hit on a few of these all the time. So I always love saying a car park.
A car park?
Yeah, there's a car park. There's a car park
That's
over
funny.
there.
Yeah.
Where in the U.S. it's a parking lot.
Right.
The Brits tend to say aircon. Turn on the aircon.
Aircon. Well, we say air conditioner or the AC.
AC in the U.S. we say AC. Let's see. Medicine is medicine.
Really?
Medicine. Yeah, medicine. Often medicine.
Yeah.
Aluminium.
Aluminium. So you bring up another good point. So in English with US English and UK English, there are a couple of words where the intonation and this emphasis is going to be different. For example, we in America say garage, right, where you park your car. A car park. Parking lot is what we would say in the US. But, car park is understood as well. Car park. And then in the UK, they say garage.
That's right. Yeah.
Right? So that's one.
See, that's funny. I didn't even notice. You're right. We were talking about different words, and I was actually talking about different pronunciations of the same word.
That's right. Yeah. So there's two different things going on. You have the words that are different but mean the same thing. So the sweets and candy example, the pram and the stroller example. And then you have these situations where the word is the same, spelled the same, but the intonation, pronunciation will be different. So another one is massage. In the US, we say massage. And then can you guess what they say in the UK?
Massage.
Message. Yeah.
Message.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that's a little bit like more of a French way. So a massage, right? You'd say in French.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I bet
so
you're right about that.
yeah, there might be some influence there. And then there's another one, advertisement. And then
Advertisement.
advertisement.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
those are pronunciations, and then there are different words. At the end of the day, though, typically speaking, as you know, as an English language learner yourself, you'll know the specific vocab that's used doesn't necessarily matter that much as long as you have the context.
That's right.
Right? If you have the context, you can kind of piece together what's being said.
Yeah.
And you kind of know what they're saying regardless. But there's never a harm in asking if you're confused about a specific word that was used.
That's right. And in terms of slang, like I don't have any context with slang, British slang.
Yeah,
Do you?
I could try, but I would just make a fool of myself. So
Yeah, so that's, can't help
Ask
you
a
there,
Brit.
but in any event, slang is the type of language you would use when you're, out with friends. It's not the register of language that you would use in a formal setting or an education context. It's, it's argot. It's casual, and even more so than casual. It's like super relaxed.
and what's also interesting is that some words that are quite British have been incorporated into American culture as well.
Yes.
One that I come across all the time now is people love to say cheers when they're
Yeah.
like as a
Sign off.
a sign off, right?
I see that a lot in emails.
Emails, they'll
Yeah.
say cheers.
Cheers.
Or if you're hanging up the phone, you say cheers before hanging up the phone. That's definitely a British thing. It's
is.
not it's not an American thing, but Americans like to use it now.
Yeah.
And I think the Americans who use it kind of feel classy doing it.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have that word, but it means something different. It's when you raise a glass as a toast or you
Right.
clink glasses
Exactly.
together. But cheers could be just bye or, it's on the way out of a conversation. Yeah, or signing off an email.
Exactly.
In terms of culture, I think you can speak to this one quite well with the humor aspect of culture.
Yeah. So one part of it was what I mentioned before, that sort of subtlety, that indirectness, right? Americans are famous or notorious for being notorious is the bad version of famous, by the way.
The other word for that is infamous.
Infamous.
So famous, and then if you put an IN as a prefix, infamous.
Infamous.
Meaning
or
notorious.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Americans are notorious for being very direct.
Yeah, overt.
Overt, right?
Right? We
Yeah.
like rub it in your face kind of thing. Like, okay, this
Yeah,
is what is happening.
Or there's a lack of was diplomacy, right?
Yeah.
That we're not going to mince our words. We're going to say exactly what's on our minds. Whereas the Brits, in my experience, tend to be a little more reserved with their opinion. Instead of Americans saying, okay, let me get the British version. The British version, if someone says something, the response might be, huh, interesting.
Yeah.
Whereas in America, they might say, huh? That sounds stupid.
Right. So, we don't shy away from showing emotions most of the time. Of course, everyone is different. But generally speaking, as a people, as a culture, collective whole, you'll find a lot of situations where people in the U.S. are very expressive with their emotions and they'll, say it out loud and be direct about it. Whereas in the U.K., exactly, what we call that a stiff upper lip. Right? Having a stiff upper lip.
Well, that's another good.
That's another one.
Yeah, that's a good one. So stiff upper lip is another important one, which is about a more so emotional
Reserving
expression,
your emotions.
right?
Yeah.
And being able to articulate the way you feel. And even the U.S. has some trouble with it. I think everywhere in the world they're struggling. They struggle with this. But the ability to articulate the way you feel, whether you're happy, you're sad, you're anxious, right? Frustrated.
Yeah.
The stiff upper lip. Is basically indicating, or it alludes to the importance of not revealing the way you feel,
Right.
in order to appear more
Calm.
professional,
Yeah.
and collected
Steady.
and stable as a
Yeah.
human being.
Yeah.
And the stiff upper lip specifically is referring to a lip that wavers when you're sort of about to cry,
Yeah.
right? The stiff upper lip says, don't cry, lock down your emotions, and behave like an adult. And so that is something that is traditionally associated with the British sort of culture.
It's like the keep calm and carry on, and there's so many different versions of that.
Soldier on.
Yeah, soldier on. Don't show your emotions. And, other cultures have that too. I would say Japan is one of them, right? Where you don't necessarily show all your emotions. In the U.S., most of the time we do show how we're feeling.
We might be a little more emotive.
Yeah.
It's true.
So that's an interesting observation.
Yeah.
And then with humor. So there are a lot of...
I find
humor.
British humor to be hilarious. It's pretty dry.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think about how to describe dry humor. Dry humor can be sparse, right? So you have to kind of really pay attention to what's being said. They are also phenomenal satirists, right? They're very good with satire. They are also very self-deprecating.
Right. So let's define that.
So self-deprecating means basically insulting yourself, right?
Yeah.
Making yourself seem like the fool. And
so it's the opposite of bragging or boasting.
It's actually a form of humility.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually a very healthy type of humor because it does show that you're willing to, you don't take yourself too seriously.
Yeah.
And so I think it's terrific. It's a great way to, observe things that are frustrating, particularly societal things that are frustrating, in a way that's also, expressing humility.
Yeah. So that's there's a very popular series in the US that was based on a successful series in the UK prior to that, The Office, right?
The Office, one of the most popular shows ever made.
Yeah, so it was well received in the US, which was, I think, surprising to the producers and the showrunners of that show in the US context, because it skews more on the side of British humor.
Yeah. They're at the end of the day, they're masters of the language, right? And so a lot of their humor has to do with little plays on words, and it's clever. If there was one way for me to describe British humor, it's clever.
Yeah.
Which is also quite a British word.
Yeah. And then the last one that we're not going to spend too much time on is the spelling. So you'll notice in the US, it will use OR if we're writing color. And if they're writing color in the UK, it's OUR, color. Or what's another one? Can you think of anything? You probably know out there.
I feel like it's funny.
Humor is one.
Humor. Yeah.
Well, no, humor. No, we write that the British way, I guess. But in any event, you'll see, in a lot of cases there's an added U, whereas in the US we remove the U and we just put the O. So color and color, for example.
Is there one with E too? I think sometimes you get an E. The point is they're little nuances.
Changes, yeah. But most of the time the pronunciation is not that well. The pronunciation is different, but the intonation and the emphasis will be most of the time the same.
Yeah.
In some cases you'll get the advertisement and advertisement situation, but most of the time, in my experience, I've been able to have a conversation with friends I have in the UK and, follow them just fine.
Yeah, for the most part, I find where I run into that issue is if I'm typing something, the spell checker, if it's using British English, it might, have an issue with the way I write something versus if it's in American English. You can always change that setting on your operating system, but that's where you might encounter it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And if you're going to do that, you have to be consistent. You can't spell one thing with the UK pronunciation.
Don't mix and match.
Yeah, and then you can't spell another thing with the American, because then you're just going to have wrong spelling, because someone's going to say, okay, is this British or is this...
That's right.
Yeah, okay, so you have to decide. But so that's kind of an overview. Again, we're from the United States of America, so I think, there's a lot more that we could probably talk about if we were British in that sense.
We should really do this with a British person.
Yeah, we should get, comment below if there's any British language YouTubers out there with received pronunciation or otherwise. Let us know. Maybe I would love to do one, honestly, with Caroline Gervin, my favorite fitness lady. She has the Northern Ireland accent. So that's part of the UK, but that's a different accent completely, right? So That would be really fun. But anyway, that's it for this conversation. Let us know what you think in the comments. Share it with friends. Be sure that you're subscribed and you're following. And if you leave us a nice review, that always makes a huge difference. It brightens our day because it tells us that you're enjoying the content, to keep it coming. And we get a sense of, what types of conversations you like, what types of lessons you love, and all of that wonderful, all that jazz, as we say in the US. So we're going to see you in another one very, very soon. Bye for now.